There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Moments so profound, so utterly transformative, that the person who walks away from them bears almost no resemblance to the one who entered. I've spent 3 years now trying to find the right words to describe what happened to me on that rain-soaked February night on the M25. 3 years of therapy, of conversations with priests and doctors, and anyone who might help me understand. 3 years of waking up in the middle of the night, reaching for my right hand, still feeling the warmth that should have faded, but somehow never did. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a structural engineer in central London. I have a flat in Bermondsey, a reasonable salary, and by all external measures, a perfectly ordinary life. But nothing about my existence has been ordinary since the night I died on a motorway in Surrey, and a teenage boy I'd never met reached across the boundary between worlds to bring me back. I need to tell you this story. Not because I want attention or validation, not because I'm trying to convince anyone of anything. I need to tell it because Carlo asked me to. In those impossible moments when time itself seemed to hold its breath, he made me promise. And whatever else I might doubt about myself or this world, I cannot doubt that promise. I cannot doubt him. Let me start at the beginning, or at least at the beginning that matters for this story. By February 2022, I had become a man who had forgotten how to feel. That might sound dramatic, but it's the most accurate way I can describe the gray numbness that had settled over my life like a permanent fog. I was 28, successful enough by conventional standards and completely, utterly lost. I hadn't always been this way. Growing up in Guildford, I'd been the kid with too many questions about everything. My mom used to joke that I'd wear out God's patience before I turned 10, given how many whys I could fit into a single afternoon. My family wasn't particularly religious, but we'd go to the local Anglican church for Christmas and Easter, and I remember loving the mystery of it all. The candles flickering in the dim nave, the ancient words of the liturgy, the feeling that there was something vast and beautiful just beyond the edge of what I could see. That wonder faded somewhere around university, Imperial College London, mechanical engineering, surrounded by brilliant people who seemed to have no use for mystery or meaning beyond equations and empirical data. I didn't consciously decide to stop believing in anything. It was more like faith quietly walked out of my life while I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't notice until years later when I went looking for it and found only empty rooms. There were other factors too, of course. The drinking culture that permeates British university life. The casual cynicism that passes for sophistication among educated young people. The girlfriends who drifted in and out of my life without leaving much trace. Relationships built on convenience rather than genuine connection. By the time I graduated, I had learned to see the world through a lens of ironic detachment, keeping everything at arm's length where it couldn't hurt me. My father died during my second year of studies. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late, gone within 3 months. I watched him waste away in a hospital bed, watched my mother's heart break in slow motion, and felt something inside me calcify into a hard, protective shell. The universe, I decided, was random and indifferent. We were born, we struggled, we died, and none of it meant anything at all. The sooner I accepted that, the better off I'd be. I remember the last conversation I had with my father, 2 days before he died. He was barely conscious, drifting in and out on a tide of morphine, but there was a moment when his eyes cleared and he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Don't lose the wonder, Danny," he whispered. "Don't let them convince you it's all just atoms and emptiness. There's more. I can almost see it now." I told him I loved him. I told him I would remember. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was lying. The wonder was already gone, buried under layers of grief and anger and protective numbness. For years, this philosophy seemed to serve me well enough. I graduated with honors, landed a good job, moved through the expected progressions of adult life. I dated women I didn't really connect with, maintained friendships that never went deeper than football matches and pub nights, and filled my evenings with Netflix and video games and anything else that might keep the silence at bay. I bought a nice flat. I built a comfortable routine. I told myself I was happy, or at least content, and tried not to notice the hollow feeling that accompanied every achievement. Promotion? Hollow? New relationship? Hollow? Exotic holiday? Hollow. Nothing seemed to fill the emptiness at my center, no matter how much I accumulated or accomplished. But by that February, even the distractions had stopped working. The numbness had evolved into something more active, a kind of low-grade despair that colored everything. I'd wake up wondering what the point was. I'd go through the motions at work, performing my job competently while feeling absolutely nothing about it. I'd come home to my empty flat, heat up something from Tesco, and stare at walls until it was late enough to justify going to bed. My friend James noticed during one of our increasingly rare pub nights. "You look like someone's turned the lights off behind your eyes, mate," he said, only half joking. "You should talk to someone. Get some help." I brushed him off. What would I even say? That I was successful, healthy, financially stable, and utterly miserable? That I had everything society told me to want and none of it meant anything? They'd think I was ungrateful. They'd think I was weak. I wasn't suicidal exactly. I didn't want to die. But I'd stopped wanting to live, which I've since learned is its own kind of dangerous. It's a passive death wish, a slow surrender to the void that doesn't announce itself with dramatic gestures, but simply erodes your will to continue bit by bit. The week before the accident, something strange happened. I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone during lunch break when an article appeared in my feed. I don't remember what website it was or why the algorithm thought I'd be interested, but the headline caught my eye: "The teenage computer geek being made a saint." Normally, I would have scrolled past anything religious, but something about the photo made me stop. It showed a kid who looked impossibly ordinary. Jeans, sneakers, a casual jacket, dark hair, bright eyes, a smile that seemed genuine rather than posed. He looked like someone I might have known at school, not like the sanitized, ethereal figures I associated with Catholic saints. I clicked the article and read about Carlo Acutis, an Italian teenager who died of leukemia in 2006, who had apparently been some kind of computer prodigy, who had created websites cataloging Eucharistic miracles around the world. The article mentioned his beatification in 2020, his upcoming canonization, the miracles attributed to his intercession. I should have found it all ridiculous. A teenager who died almost 2 decades ago, being venerated as a saint, people claiming he'd cured diseases, appeared in visions, worked wonders from beyond the grave. It was exactly the kind of superstitious nonsense I'd trained myself to dismiss, but I couldn't stop looking at his face. There was something in that photograph that I couldn't explain, a quality of aliveness, of joy, that seemed to leap off the screen. His eyes held a secret, I thought. He knew something the rest of us had forgotten. I found myself reading more articles, watching YouTube videos, falling down a rabbit hole of information about this strange young man who had apparently lived with such intensity and purpose that the Catholic Church was preparing to declare him a saint. What struck me most was how normal he seemed. He played video games, he had a PlayStation, he loved his dogs and made funny videos and ate Nutella like any other teenager. But alongside all that ordinariness, he'd apparently possessed a conviction so deep that he'd devoted his brief life to something he believed was infinitely important. I watched an interview with his mother, Antonia, describing how Carlo would wake up early to attend Mass before school, how he'd spend hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament, just sitting there in silent adoration, how he'd said the rosary every day, never missing, even during his final illness. For him, the Eucharist was everything, she said, tears in her eyes. He called it his highway to heaven. To always be united with Jesus, Carlo had written, that is my life's program. I remember reading that quote and feeling something crack open in my chest. Not belief exactly, more like a desperate, aching wish that such conviction were possible. That meaning existed, that there was something worth living for beyond the gray emptiness I'd come to accept as reality. I saved a photo of Carlo to my phone. I'm not sure why. I told myself it was just curiosity, just a passing interest in an unusual story. But I looked at that photo several times over the following days, something in his expression both comforting and challenging me in ways I couldn't articulate. At night, before falling asleep, I'd pull up the photo and study his face. What did you know? I'd wonder. What did you find that I've lost? Or never had? The night of the accident, I'd been visiting my mom in Guilford. She'd been struggling since Dad died, and I tried to make the drive down every few weeks to check on her. We'd had dinner together, watched some television, and talked about nothing in particular. As I was leaving, she hugged me longer than usual. "Drive safely, love," she said. "The roads are terrible tonight." She paused at the door, looking at me with that penetrating maternal gaze that always made me feel like she could see through all my defenses. "Are you all right, Danny? Really all right? You seem distant lately. More than usual." I forced a smile. "Just tired, Mum. Work's been mental." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Call me when you get home, yeah? So I know you made it safe. She was right about the roads. February rain was coming down in sheets, the kind of weather where you can barely see past your windscreen even with the wipers on full. I should have stayed the night, but I had an early meeting the next morning and the stubborn, foolish certainty that I'd be fine. The M25 was quieter than usual, most sensible people having stayed off the roads. I put on a podcast to keep myself alert, something about cryptocurrency that I wasn't really listening to. The rain hammered against the roof of my car, a relentless percussion that demanded attention. I was in the outside lane, doing about 60 when it happened. Later, the police would reconstruct the accident from the physical evidence. A lorry had lost control about a quarter-mile ahead, jackknifed across multiple lanes. The driver had apparently fallen asleep at the wheel. By the time I came around the curve and saw the wall of metal blocking the motorway, there was no time to stop. I jerked the wheel left, felt my car begin to spin on the wet surface, and then everything became chaos. I remember impacts, plural, the crunch of metal, the explosion of glass, the violent sensation of being thrown against my seatbelt again and again as the car tumbled. I remember screaming, though I'm not sure if it was me or the sound of metal tearing. I remember a moment of absolute clarity in the midst of the mayhem, a thought as distinct and calm as a voice. So this is how it ends. And then, nothing. When I say nothing, I mean it literally. Not darkness, not unconsciousness as I'd experienced it before when I'd had surgery or fainted. This was an absence so complete it defied description. No time, no space, no self. Just nothing. I don't know how long that nothing lasted. It could have been seconds or centuries. But at some point, I became aware that I was aware. Consciousness returned like a gradually brightening light, and with it came the strangest sensation I've ever experienced. I was floating. That's the only word that fits, though it wasn't floating in any physical sense. I had no body, or if I did, I couldn't feel it. I was simply present, suspended in a space that seemed to have no dimensions yet somehow felt infinite. The space around me was filled with light, not harsh or blinding, but warm, golden, like late afternoon sunlight filtering through honey. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, and it carried with it a feeling of peace so profound that I almost forgot to wonder where I was or what had happened. I tried to look around, but looking wasn't quite the right word. I perceived in all directions simultaneously, aware of the light not through eyes but through something deeper, more fundamental. The golden radiance extended infinitely in every direction, pulsing gently with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. And then I noticed the music. It wasn't sound exactly, not vibrations in air hitting eardrums. It was more like mathematics made audible. Patterns within patterns within patterns, harmonies so complex and beautiful that just perceiving them brought tears to eyes I no longer had. Gradually, I became aware that I wasn't alone. There was a presence nearby. At first, I perceived it as simply a concentration of that golden light, a place where the warmth seemed more intense. But as my awareness sharpened, the presence began to take on form. He appeared slowly, like a photograph developing. First, just the general outline of a figure. Then features began to emerge. Dark hair, a young face, casual clothes, and those eyes, so full of life and joy that I recognized him immediately, even though we'd never met, even though he'd been dead for 16 years. Carlo Acutis stood before me, looking exactly as he had in the photographs I'd been studying all week. Jeans, trainers, a simple jacket over a red polo shirt, maybe 15 or 16, with the slight awkwardness of adolescence still visible in his frame. But there was nothing awkward about his presence. He radiated a peace and certainty that seemed to still the very air around him. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. I was aware that I should be afraid, or at least confused. I'd just died, apparently, and was now facing the apparition of a teenage boy the Catholic Church considered a saint. By any rational measure, this was impossible, but I felt no fear, only a quiet wonder, and beneath that, a desperate, aching hope that I hadn't felt in years. "You've been looking at my photo," Carlo said. His voice was gentle, warm, carrying a hint of amusement. He spoke English with a subtle Italian accent, and the ordinariness of his tone made the situation feel almost natural. Yes, I managed. "I found an article about you. I don't know why I know why." He smiled, and that smile seemed to light up the entire golden space around us. "You were looking for something. You've been looking for a long time, even though you stopped believing there was anything to find. Hearing my own inner state described so accurately by this young stranger should have been unsettling. Instead, it felt like relief, like finally being seen after years of hiding. Am I dead? I asked. Carlo tilted his head slightly, considering the question. You're in between. Your body is very badly hurt. The doctors haven't reached you yet. You have a choice to make. A choice? Whether to stay or go back. I thought about my life. The gray numbness, the purposeless days, the empty flat waiting for me in Bermondsey, the hollow achievements, the shallow relationships, the endless distraction. What was there to go back to? Why would I go back? I heard myself ask. There's nothing there. I've been dead inside for years. I gestured at the golden light surrounding us. This is the first peace I've felt since I can remember. Carlo's expression shifted. Not pity, exactly, but a deep compassion that seemed to see all the way through me. I understand, he said. I felt the weight of the world too sometimes. The pain, the darkness, all the suffering that humans inflict on each other and themselves. It can seem unbearable when you're carrying it alone. How did you bear it? I asked. You were 15. You were dying of leukemia. How could you possibly have been as joyful as everyone says you were? Because I wasn't carrying it alone. Carlo stepped closer, and I became aware of warmth emanating from him, a gentle radiance that seemed to ease something tight in my chest. I had Jesus, in the Eucharist, in prayer, in the simple act of turning toward him again and again. I found the source of all joy, and once you find that, nothing can take it away. Not sickness, not death, nothing. I don't know how to believe that, I whispered. I used to, maybe, when I was a child, but it's been so long and there's been so much darkness. Belief isn't something you have to manufacture on your own. Carlo was very close now, close enough that I could see the individual threads in his jacket, the slight stubble on his young chin, a small mole near his left ear. It's a gift. All you have to do is open your hands to receive it. I don't know how to do that either. Then let me show you. And Carlo reached out and touched me. I need to stop here and try to explain what happened in that moment, though I know my words will fall hopelessly short. Human language wasn't designed to describe experiences like this. But I promised Carlo I would try, so I'll try. His hand made contact with mine, and the instant it did, everything changed. First, there was the physical sensation, though physical seems like the wrong word given that I had no body. His touch was warm, startlingly warm, like holding a cup of tea on a freezing day. But it wasn't just surface warmth. The heat seemed to penetrate through me, sinking deeper and deeper until it reached places I didn't know existed. The warmth found the frozen core of me, the place where I'd locked away all my grief and fear and longing. It melted barriers I'd spent years constructing, dissolved defenses I'd thought were essential for survival. And as those walls came down, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd forgotten it existed. I felt alive. Then came the light. The golden glow that had surrounded us intensified, pouring into me through the point where Carlo's hand met mine. It flooded through whatever I was in that moment, filling every corner of my being with radiance. Places that had been dark for so long they'd forgotten light was possible suddenly blazed with illumination. But the warmth and light were only the beginning. Carried within them, transmitted through Carlo's touch like information through a fiber optic cable, came something else entirely. Knowledge, understanding, love. Not abstract concepts, but lived realities that flooded through me with overwhelming intensity. I understood in that moment what it meant to be truly known. Not the surface knowledge that other people have of us, the masks we wear, and the performances we give, but deep knowledge, intimate knowledge, the kind that sees every shameful secret and every hidden wound and loves us anyway. I felt the weight of all my years of numbness, all my cynicism and despair, and I felt it being lifted, not erased, not forgotten, but somehow transformed. The suffering I'd experienced wasn't meaningless. It was being woven into something larger, something I couldn't fully comprehend but could begin to glimpse. I saw things, or rather I experienced things, lived them from the inside even as I watched them from outside. I was Carlo as a young boy, kneeling before a tabernacle in an Italian church, tears streaming down his face as he felt the presence of Christ for the first time. The joy that flooded through him was so intense it was almost painful, a happiness so complete it threatened to break his small body apart. I understood then why he'd devoted his life to the Eucharist. How could you not after an encounter like that? I was Carlo at school, surrounded by classmates who didn't understand his faith. I felt his loneliness, his frustration at not being able to share what he'd found, but I also felt his determination, his absolute certainty that the joy was worth any cost. I was Carlo at his computer, working late into the night, building websites with trembling fingers, driven by an urgency to share what he had found with a world drowning in confusion and despair. Every click of the keyboard was a prayer, every line of code an act of love. He wasn't seeking fame or recognition. He simply couldn't bear the thought of others not knowing what was available to them. I was Carlo walking his dog, playing video games with friends, eating dinner with his family. Ordinary moments, unremarkable from the outside, but each one suffused with a consciousness of God's presence. He didn't separate his spiritual life from his daily life. They were the same thing. I was Carlo in a hospital bed, his body failing, his mother weeping beside him. I felt the fear, yes, but beneath it a peace so profound it made the fear seem almost trivial. I offer all my suffering to the Lord, he whispered, for the Pope, for the Church, so that I won't have to go to purgatory. His final days, I understood, were not defeat, but culmination. Every moment of suffering was transformed into prayer. I was Carlo taking his last breath, and then I was Carlo being welcomed into light so brilliant it made the golden glow around us seem dim by comparison. I felt the embrace of perfect love, saw the faces of saints and angels turning toward the newest arrival with joy, experienced what it meant to come home after a long journey to a place that had always been waiting. And through it all, through every moment and memory and revelation, I felt Carlo's hand holding mine, anchoring me, guiding me through experiences that should have been overwhelming. But he wasn't just showing me his life. He was showing me something else as well. I saw a man in a London flat staring at walls. I saw him as a child, bright-eyed and full of questions, asking his mother about angels and heaven and whether dogs went there too. I saw the slow accumulation of hurts and disappointments that had buried that child under layers of protective numbness. I saw every choice that had led him away from wonder and meaning. Every moment he had chosen safety over openness, cynicism over hope. I saw my father dying in that hospital bed, trying to tell me something important. Don't lose the wonder, Danny. I saw myself dismissing his words, even as I promised to remember them. I saw every moment when Grace had knocked on the door of my heart, and I had pretended not to be home. I saw myself, and for the first time in years, I wept for what I had become. But Carlo wasn't showing me this to condemn me. Through our connected hands, I felt his compassion, his absolute conviction that none of this was beyond repair. I felt him showing me the same man, but different, transformed. I saw a version of Daniel Whitmore who had found his way back to meaning, who used his gifts for purposes beyond mere survival, who woke each morning with genuine anticipation for the day ahead. I saw myself kneeling before a tabernacle, tears streaming down my face, feeling the same presence Carlo had found as a child. I saw the frozen places in my heart finally thawing. I saw the gray numbness dissolving in golden light. "This is what you could be," Carlo said, and his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This is what you're meant to be. But you have to choose it. You have to go back." "I'm afraid," I admitted. "What if I can't hold on to this? What if I go back and everything just fades and I end up exactly where I was?" "You won't be able to hold on to this," Carlo said honestly. "Not all of it. Human minds aren't built to contain experiences like this. The memories will fade. The feelings will dull. That's just how it works." "Then what's the point?" Carlo squeezed my hand, and another wave of warmth flowed through me. His eyes, so full of joy, held mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "The point is that even when the memory fades, something will remain. A seed. A small, quiet knowing that there is more to existence than what you can see and measure. That seed won't force you to do anything. It won't make choices for you. But it will be there, waiting. And every time you turn toward it, every time you choose faith over fear, hope over despair, love over indifference, it will grow. How do I turn toward it? How do I even find it? Start with the Eucharist." Carlo's eyes were bright with an enthusiasm that seemed almost boyish. "I know you're not Catholic. I know you don't believe in it yet. But start there anyway. Go to Mass. Sit in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to feel anything. Just show up." That's how it started for me, and it changed everything. "The Eucharist," I repeated. That's what you devoted your life to. The miracles, the website, because it's him. The certainty in Carlo's voice was absolute. Really, truly, completely him. Present in every tabernacle in every church in the world, waiting for anyone who wants to come. The source of all joy, available to everyone. How could I not share that? How could I not spend every moment I had pointing people toward the greatest treasure in the universe? I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. The longing was so intense, it felt like physical pain, a hunger that had been gnawing at me for years without my even knowing it. I also want you to know, Carlo continued, that what you're feeling right now, this love, this warmth, this sense of being known and accepted exactly as you are, this isn't special to me. I'm not the source. I'm just a messenger, a window. What you're feeling is God's love, and it's available to everyone, all the time. You don't need a near-death experience to access it. You just need to be willing to receive it. How can God love me? I heard myself ask. I've spent years running away from him. I've denied his existence. I've lived like nothing matters, like no one is watching. Carlo smiled gently. Do you think your father stopped loving you when you forgot his last words? Do you think your mother stops loving you when you don't call for weeks? That's different. It's exactly the same. Love doesn't wait for you to be worthy. It doesn't keep score. It just loves continuously, eternally, regardless of what you do with it. God has been loving you every moment of your life, Daniel. Every moment of your numbness, your despair, your denial. The love hasn't wavered for an instant. Tears were streaming down whatever served as my face in this place. I've wasted so much time. Time isn't wasted that leads you home. Every wandering was part of the journey, and you're not home yet. There's still more journey ahead. That's why you need to go back. One more thing, Carlo said. His form was beginning to shimmer slightly, becoming less solid. I sensed that our time was running short. When you go back, you'll need to tell people about this. Not everyone, not right away, but eventually, when you're ready, you need to share what happened here. Why? Because there are others like you, millions of them, people who have forgotten how to feel, who have given up on meaning, who are slowly dying inside while their bodies keep moving. They need to know that there's another way. They need to know that hope is possible. But who would believe me? I'll sound insane. Carlo laughed, and the sound was like bells ringing in a clear morning. Some will believe, some won't. That's not your concern. Your job is just to tell the truth. What people do with it is between them and God. He was fading now, becoming more light than form, but his hand in mine remained solid, warm, present. I don't want you to go, I said, and I was surprised to find that I was crying. I've never felt anything like this. I've never felt this loved. You're always this loved. Carlo's voice was gentle, fading like his form, but still clear. Every moment of every day you're loved like this. You just couldn't feel it through all the walls you'd built. But now you know. Now you've felt it. And no matter how far you wander, no matter how much you forget, that love will be there waiting for you. It's eternal. It doesn't depend on you being good enough or faithful enough or anything enough. It just is. Carlo, go back, Daniel. He was almost gone now. Just a shimmer of gold in the golden light. Live. Really live the way you were meant to. Find Jesus in the Eucharist. Let him transform you. And when the time comes, tell them. Tell them about the touch. His hand squeezed mine one final time, and in that squeeze was compressed everything he'd shown me, everything he'd shared, every ounce of love and hope and faith that had defined his brief, luminous life. Then he was gone, and I was falling. The golden light collapsed around me, rushing downward, becoming darkness and cold and pain. So much pain. My body came back to me all at once, a broken thing screaming with damage. I felt shattered ribs and torn flesh and blood filling my lungs. I felt the crushed remains of my car wrapped around me like a metal coffin. I felt the rain still falling, cold drops landing on exposed skin. But beneath all the pain, beneath the terror and confusion, I felt something else. Warmth in my right hand. The hand Carlo had held. Even as the cold February rain soaked through my clothes and shock began to set in, that hand remained warm. A small point of golden light in the darkness, a seed planted deep where nothing could reach it. I heard voices, shouting, flashlights cutting through the rain, hands reaching into the wreckage, checking for pulse, calling for equipment. Someone saying, "This one's alive, barely, we need the jaws now." I tried to speak, tried to tell them about Carlo, about the light, about everything, but my body wouldn't cooperate. All I could do was lie there in the ruins of my car, holding on to consciousness by a thread, clutching the warmth in my right hand like a lifeline. The next hours were a blur of sirens and hospital lights and urgent medical procedures. I learned later that I'd coded twice on the way to the hospital, that the trauma team had worked for hours to stop internal bleeding and stabilize my broken bones, that by any reasonable medical assessment, I should have died several times over. My injuries were catastrophic. A collapsed lung, ruptured spleen, multiple fractures in my legs and pelvis, internal bleeding that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The paramedics who reached me first thought they were recovering a body, not rescuing a survivor. One of them told me later, months after I'd been discharged, that he'd been doing this job for 20 years and had never seen anyone survive injuries like mine. "When we pulled you out of that wreckage, I was certain you were gone," he said. "But then I checked your pulse and there it was. Weak, thready, but there. And your right hand was warm." I remember thinking that was strange because the rest of you was cold from shock and the rain, but your right hand felt like you'd been holding a cup of tea. I didn't tell him why. I wasn't ready then to share the full story, but his words confirmed something I'd been wondering. The warmth wasn't just in my perception. It was real enough for others to notice. The doctors couldn't explain it. "We lost you twice in the ambulance," one of them told me later. "The paramedics did CPR for almost 7 minutes on the second occasion. Frankly, the fact that you're here, talking to me, with no apparent brain damage, it's not something I can account for medically, but I could account for it. I knew why I'd survived. I'd been sent back. When I finally woke up 3 days later in the ICU at St. George's Hospital, the first thing I did was look at my right hand. It looked normal. No marks, no glow, nothing visible to distinguish it from my left hand or anyone else's hand, but when I pressed it against my chest, I could feel it. Warmth, faint, but unmistakable. A tiny ember that the cold, clinical atmosphere of the hospital couldn't extinguish. My mother was there when I woke, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Dark circles under her eyes, her hair unwashed and pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of cold tea. When she saw my eyes open, she burst into tears and clutched my left hand, careful to avoid the IV lines. "Daniel, oh God, Daniel, we thought we'd lost you." I wanted to tell her everything. About the golden light, about Carlo, about the touch that still warmed my palm. But the words wouldn't come. It was too soon, too raw, and besides, how could I possibly explain? So I just held her hand and let her cry, and silently made a promise to the teenage saint who had sent me back. The recovery was long and difficult. Multiple surgeries to repair internal damage, metal rods inserted to stabilize broken bones, months of physical therapy to learn to walk again, pain that seemed endless, pills that made me foggy and disconnected. There was a period of depression when my body's limitations made the golden memories seem like fever dreams, hallucinations conjured by a traumatized brain. There were days when I doubted everything, when the cold, gray numbness tried to creep back in and claim the territory it had lost. There were nights when I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, but the warmth in my hand never faded. No matter how dark things got, I could always find that small point of heat, that tangible reminder of what I'd experienced. And when I focused on it, memories would surface. Carlo's smile, the quality of the light, the feeling of being known and loved beyond anything I'd ever experienced on Earth. 3 months after the accident, I walked into a Catholic church for the first time in my adult life. It was a small parish in Southwark, nothing grand or famous. Our Lady of La Salette, an unassuming building on a quiet street, easily missed if you didn't know to look for it. I had no idea what I was doing, no understanding of the liturgy or the prayers. I just found a pew near the back, sat down, and waited. The Mass bewildered me. The standing and sitting and kneeling. The responses I didn't know. The mysterious ritual at the altar that seemed to go on forever. I felt completely out of place. An imposter in a world I didn't understand. The elderly women around me all seemed to know exactly what to do, moving through the liturgy with practiced ease while I stumbled along several beats behind. But then came the moment of consecration. The priest lifted the bread and spoke words I couldn't quite hear, and suddenly the warmth in my hand flared. For just an instant, the golden light was back. I could feel it surrounding me, flowing through me, concentrated in the small white disc held aloft at the altar. I gasped out loud. A few people turned to look at me, but I didn't care. because I understood, finally and completely, what Carlo had been trying to tell me. The Eucharist wasn't a symbol. It wasn't a memorial or a metaphor. It was him. Really, truly, completely him. The same presence I'd felt in the golden light, the same love that had poured through Carlo's touch, was right there in that ordinary-looking piece of bread, available to anyone who came to receive it. I stayed after Mass that day, sitting alone in the empty church, staring at the tabernacle. Hours passed. The light through the windows shifted from morning to afternoon. And still I sat, feeling the warmth in my hand and the presence in the tabernacle, understanding at last why Carlo had called this his highway to heaven. I started RCIA classes the following week. The priest, Father Michael, was a patient Irishman in his 60s who didn't seem fazed by my strange story. "God works in mysterious ways," he said when I finished telling him about the accident and the vision and the touch. "Who am I to say what's possible?" He lent me books, recommended podcasts, answered my endless questions with the patience of a man who had spent decades guiding lost souls home. He never pushed, never pressured, just gently pointed me toward the next step whenever I was ready to take it. The RCIA group met every Thursday evening in the parish hall, a diverse collection of seekers. There was Margaret, a retired schoolteacher whose husband had been Catholic and who wanted to understand the faith that had sustained him through decades of marriage. There was James, a young professional like me, drawn to the church through the writings of G.K. Chesterton. There was Sarah, a single mother seeking stability and meaning for herself and her children. And there were others, each with their own story, their own journey, their own reasons for being there. I didn't tell them about Carlo at first. It seemed too personal, too strange. But as the weeks passed and we grew to know each other, I began to share pieces of my experience. Not the full vision, not the details of the touch, but the general outline. That I'd had a near-death experience, that I'd encountered something I couldn't explain, that it had led me here. They listened without judgment. In that group, surrounded by others who were also searching, I began to understand something important. Faith wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being willing to keep asking the questions. The classes were full of information I'd never known, history and theology and tradition stretching back 2,000 years. I learned about the early church fathers, about the councils that had shaped doctrine, about the saints who had given their lives for what they believed. I learned about transubstantiation, the teaching that the bread and wine truly become the body and blood of Christ, not just symbolically, but really, substantially, completely. When Father Michael explained this doctrine, I felt the warmth in my hand flare. Carlo had been right. This was what he'd been trying to tell me. The Eucharist was everything. But more important than the information was the practice. Going to Mass, sitting in adoration, learning to pray. It wasn't easy. The gray numbness didn't surrender without a fight. There were weeks when I felt nothing, when the warmth in my hand seemed like the only evidence that any of this was real. There were doubts that nagged at me in the small hours, whispering that I was deluding myself, that the vision had been nothing more than oxygen-deprived neurons firing randomly. But I kept showing up. That's what Carlo had told me to do. Just show up. And gradually, so gradually I almost didn't notice, things began to change. The numbness started to thaw. Colors seemed brighter. Music sounded richer. I found myself noticing small beauties I'd overlooked for years. The way sunlight fell through my kitchen window, the sound of children laughing in the park below my flat, the taste of good coffee on a cold morning. I started calling my mother more often. I reached out to old friends I'd neglected. I began to take interest in my work again, not just as a means of survival, but as something meaningful in itself. Buildings I designed would shelter people, protect them, give them space to live their lives. That mattered. I was received into the Catholic Church at Easter Vigil the following year. The ceremony took place late at night, the church lit only by candles, full of incense and ancient prayers. When the priest poured water over my head and I felt it run down my face, mingling with my tears, the warmth in my hand blazed so bright, I wondered if everyone could see it. My mother came to the ceremony, bewildered but supportive. "Your father would be proud," she whispered afterward. "He always hoped you'd find your way back to faith." I still work as a structural engineer. I still live in London, though I've moved to a different flat, one closer to my parish. From the outside, my life might look similar to what it was before, but from the inside, everything has changed. I go to Mass every day before work, early morning services in that same small church in Southwark. I sit in adoration at least once a week, just being present with the one who was present with me in the golden light. The tabernacle glows with a warmth that only I can see, but I know it's there. My relationships have transformed too. I'm dating someone now, a woman named Claire whom I met through the parish. She knows my story, and instead of thinking I'm crazy, she sees it as a beautiful part of who I am. For the first time in my life, I'm in a relationship that isn't hollow. We pray together. We go to Mass together. We talk about the future with hope rather than anxiety. I've reconciled with friends I'd pushed away during my years of numbness. James, who had noticed the lights going out behind my eyes at that pub, was one of the first I reached out to after my conversion. He was shocked initially. "You're Catholic now? Seriously? You used to argue religion was for people who couldn't handle reality." "I was wrong," I told him simply. "Reality is far stranger and more beautiful than I ever imagined." He hasn't converted himself, and I don't push him, but he's curious now. He asks questions sometimes, and I answer honestly, without trying to convince him of anything, just sharing my experience. My work has taken on new meaning too. I used to see engineering as just a job, a way to pay the bills. Now I see it as a vocation. Every building I help design is a space where people will live, work, worship, love. The calculations I do, the structures I create, they matter. They're my way of serving others, of participating in the ongoing work of creation. I think about my father often these days. "Don't lose the wonder, Danny," he'd said. For years I thought I'd failed him by letting the wonder die. But now I understand that wonder can be reborn, that what seems dead can come back to life, that it's never too late. I visit his grave regularly now, something I avoided for many years after he died. I tell him about my life, about Claire, about my faith. I tell him he was right, that there was more, that I almost missed it, but someone reached out and pulled me back. "You'd have liked Carlo," I tell him. "He reminds me of you a bit. That same joy, that same certainty that life means something." The warmth in my hand pulses gently and warmly when I say things like that. I've come to understand it as Carlo's way of saying yes, of affirming what I'm thinking or feeling. It's not a constant communication, not a voice in my head or clear messages. Just a gentle warmth that ebbs and flows, reminding me that I'm not alone, that the connection formed in those impossible moments between life and death hasn't been severed. I've started volunteering with a youth group at my parish, talking to teenagers about faith in a world that tells them faith is foolish. Sometimes I show them pictures of Carlo, tell them about the teenage saint who played PlayStation and made YouTube videos and loved Jesus more than anything else in the universe. Their eyes light up when they realize that holiness doesn't require being weird or removed from normal life. Last month, one of the teenagers, a 16-year-old named Sophie, came to me after our session. She had tears in her eyes. "I've been so depressed," she said. "I didn't think anyone could understand. But hearing about Carlo, about how he found joy even though he was dying, it makes me think maybe there's hope for me too." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her and told her that I'd been exactly where she was, that I'd forgotten how to feel, that I'd given up on meaning, and that someone had reached out to me in my darkest moment and shown me there was another way. "Who?" she asked. And for the first time, I told someone who wasn't a priest or my mother or a close friend. I told her about Carlo, about the touch, about the warmth that still lived in my right hand, about the golden light and the message I'd been given. She believed me. I could see it in her eyes, not because my story was convincing, but because she needed to believe, because she was drowning and someone had thrown her a rope. That's why I'm telling this story now, not to prove anything, not to convince skeptics, not to make myself seem special. I'm telling it because there are people out there who need to hear it, people like Sophie, people like the man I used to be. I've also made a pilgrimage to Assisi, to the sanctuary of the Renunciation where Carlo's body now rests. I went last spring, taking time off work and traveling alone to Italy. I needed to see him, or what remained of him in this world. The sanctuary was smaller than I'd expected, simpler, but the presence was unmistakable. The same warmth I felt in my hand, concentrated in that small space, radiating from the glass case where Carlo's body lay displayed in his typical clothes, jeans, trainers, a jacket. He looked peaceful, as if he were simply sleeping. I knelt there for hours, praying, weeping, thanking him for what he'd done for me. The other pilgrims came and went, taking photos, saying quick prayers, moving on. But I couldn't leave. I felt like I was visiting an old friend, someone who had saved my life and whom I'd never properly thanked. "You asked me to tell them," I whispered to him. "I'm trying. I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm trying. And I swear, though I know it might have been my imagination, I felt the warmth in my hand pulse in response. Just once, just enough to let me know he'd heard. I haven't told many people the full story of what happened on the M25. My mother knows some of it. My priest knows all of it. A few close friends have heard pieces. But mostly I've kept it private, unsure how to share something so intimate and strange. Until now. Carlo asked me to tell people about the touch. He said there were others like me, millions of them, dying inside while their bodies kept moving. He said they needed to know that hope was possible. I think he was right. I think about the person I was before the accident, the man who had forgotten how to feel, who saw no point in existence beyond mere survival. That man would have scrolled past this story, dismissed it as religious nonsense, gone back to his gray numbness. But maybe, just maybe, something would have stuck. A phrase, an image, a small seed planted in soil that seemed barren, but wasn't. The thing about seeds is that they don't need perfect conditions to grow. They just need a crack in the hardened ground, a tiny opening where light can enter. That's what Carlo gave me in those moments between life and death. Not certainty, not proof, not an overwhelming mystical experience that left no room for doubt. Just a crack. Just enough light to make me wonder if there might be more. And wonder, as my father tried to tell me, is the beginning of everything. If you're reading this, and you recognize yourself in the person I used to be, if you've built walls around your heart and forgotten there was ever anything worth protecting inside, I want you to know something. Those walls can come down. The numbness can thaw. The gray fog can lift. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't happen because you do everything right or believe hard enough. It happens because love is patient. Love is persistent. Love never gives up on us, even when we've given up on ourselves. So this is me telling the truth, as Carlo asked. This is me sharing what happened in those impossible moments between life and death, when a teenage boy who died in 2006 reached across the boundary of worlds to touch my hand. I can't prove any of it. I have no physical evidence, no way to demonstrate that what I experienced was anything more than neurons firing randomly in a traumatized brain. If you want to dismiss this as hallucination or wishful thinking, I can't stop you. But I'll tell you this. The warmth in my right hand has never faded. 3 years later, it's still there. Faint, subtle, easy to miss if you're not paying attention, but present. A constant reminder of golden light and infinite love in a young man's smile. Carlo Acutis touched me in my final moment. And that touch, that brief point of contact between his world and mine, changed everything. He told me to find Jesus in the Eucharist. I did. He told me to let him transform me. He has. He told me to tell people about the touch when I was ready. I'm ready. Blessed Carlo Acutis, pray for us. Pray for all the walking dead, all the people who have forgotten how to feel, all the souls trapped in gray numbness who don't know there's another way. You showed me the light. Help me show others. And to anyone reading this who sees themselves in the person I used to be, I have one thing to say. There is more. So much more. Beyond the numbness, beyond the despair, beyond the gray fog that seems to cover everything, there is light. Golden, warm, infinite light. There is love that doesn't depend on your worthiness or achievement or even your belief. There is a teenage saint who played video games and died too young and wants desperately for you to know that joy is possible. You don't have to manufacture faith on your own. It's a gift. All you have to do is open your hands to receive it. Start with the Eucharist. Go to a Mass, any Mass, even if you don't understand what's happening. Sit in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, even if you don't believe it's anything more than bread. Just show up. That's all Carlo asked of me, and it changed everything. The touch that warmed my hand can warm yours too. The light that filled that space between worlds wants to fill your heart. The love that sent me back wants to bring you home. You just have to let it. If this story touched your heart, ask for Carlo Acutis' intercession in your prayers. He's listening, I promise you that. Subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and hit the notification bell for more stories that inspire our faith.